Okay guys, so when I say crisp cinematic video, I don't mean sharp video. Crisp and clear is more about the whole feel of an image. It should feel alive and almost tangible. Does that make sense? And sharpness is just a small part of what makes video crisp and clear. Here's a quick example of what I mean. On the left here is what I would call a sharp image, and on the right a crisp and clear image. Even though the one on the right is less sharp than the one on the left. Now, of course, the type of camera does make a difference, because you can't achieve the same crisp cinematic look like a lot of Hollywood movies these days when you're shooting with a Canon M50 or a Sony a7 III, whatever. But that doesn't mean that you can't shoot crisp looking video without a cinema camera, because you can. Welcome to another video, guys. You know, in the last few weeks, you've all been really active in the comment section, but that's awesome. I'm taking in all the ideas and suggestions so that I can make every video slightly more enjoyable and just better. But anyway, have you ever been in an electronics store where they have all the TVs lined up and they all have the settings for brightness and saturation, contrast and sharpness all maxed out? That's not what I mean when I say crisp and clear cinematic video. That's no. And sharpness is also often confused with detail. Sharpness you can add in post, but detail you can't add. And in a way, detail is a lot more important for getting a crisp and nice looking image. But the amount of detail has a lot to do with the sensor and the type of camera you have. So that's not what we're gonna talk about today. I'm gonna give you some tips for shooting nice looking, crisp looking cinematic footage regardless of the camera or sensor you have. Okay, so like I said, crisp and clear is not the same as sharp, and it's a mistake a lot of beginners make. I've done it too when I was starting out. I turned the sharpening setting all the way up, but a lot of times that will have the opposite effect. It will make your footage look very artificial and digital and not at all crisp. That's not what you want. It will also enhance the ugly artifacts in your footage. So what I do now, and it doesn't matter if I use my Canon M50 or my Canon R5, I turn sharpening off or sometimes on +1. Usually default sharpening settings are +4 or even +7, and that's definitely no good. The thing is, it's always better having to add sharpening in post than having to add softening in post. And it's key to learn when it's too much, because it's a really fine line between too much and just enough. I still make that mistake sometimes, crossing the line. It's a learning process. But if possible and when needed, add sharpening in post and turn the in-camera sharpening off. Part of it, of course, is subjective. I like it a bit softer than most people, I think. But for me, too soft is better than too sharp, definitely. And guys, also remember, too soft doesn't mean out of focus. Those are two completely different things. Now, if you don't want to turn off the in-camera sharpening because you don't have software to do some sharpening in post, then try to find a sweet spot. You know, not too high and not too low, but definitely not too high, ever. Composition is definitely underrated because composition can make your footage look more crisp and clear, but it can also make your footage appear more sharp, just because of the whole look and feel of the image. Always make sure to go for calm and simple compositions. Don't try to cram too much into the frame, and also pay attention to where you place your subject. Now, of course, it depends on what kind of project you're working on. When shooting a product video, I like to have a clean background behind my subject so that it pops. But that doesn't mean an empty background. I just don't want too much distraction behind the subject. And most of the time, it's just a matter of changing the angle a bit to make your shot better, to have a better composition. Now, when you're shooting a commercial or a short film with people, you also have to make sure to nail your compositions, but also make sure that you don't overdo it. What I mean is, don't put your subject or your talent in front of an empty clean wall for every shot and every scene, because then it will look unnatural. You have to find a nice balance between clean and simple compositions, but also a natural looking image and natural flow of your story. But composition is definitely underrated. Try to keep it calm and simple for a crisp and clear looking cinematic image. Light will definitely make your footage look more crisp and clear, but light can also make your footage appear more sharp. Obviously, the correct lighting and enough light is important. I have a few videos on my setup here that you can check out. I'll link them in the description. But there's also a few techniques you can use, and an important cinematic technique is backlight. And backlight works really well when you're shooting people, for example. It gives your footage that 3D kind of effect and more depth. If everything is evenly lit from the front, your image could appear flat and dull. A lot of times, what you need to look for is that bright line on the edge of someone's face to separate the subject from the background. You can use both the sun or artificial light. And of course, if you're shooting a product B-roll or a cinematic B-roll, whatever, you can use similar techniques. I always like to add some extra light around the edges of the subject I'm shooting. And it doesn't necessarily have to be backlight. I usually move all the way around the subject to find where the light looks nice, when it starts looking crisp and clear. So background separation and enough light, that's important. Okay, so tip number 4 is aperture. And aperture is important for sharpness, but also for getting a crisp and clear image. Usually a lens at the widest aperture is less sharp. Stopping down helps to make your image sharp all the way to the edges, but it depends on the lens. For a fast lens, 1.4 or 1.8, the sweet spot is around 3.5. But for a lens that has 2.8 as the widest aperture, the sweet spot will be around 5.6. And just like the previous tips, aperture is also important to get some background separation. Now, how much blur you want in the background is subjective. I always recommend not to go too wide, not too much blur. You should be able to recognize the background. It should look natural, you know? Here you can see the difference with and without background separation. And the final tip is exposure. Always make sure that you have the correct exposure, because especially underexposing will cause noise and that will make your image look dull and mushy. One way to get the correct exposure on most cameras is by using the histogram. Always make sure that you expose for the middle, or when shooting log, to the right. So almost overexposing without clipping the highlights, of course. Or try not to clip the highlights. Underexposing is the worst you can do. The histogram to the left means an underexposed image. And that's it, guys. I hope you understand the difference between sharp and crisp a little bit better now. If you have any questions, just ask me in the comments. And maybe give this video a thumbs up if you also like crisp and clear footage. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.